Today, I would like to talk about the cultural phenomena of a marksman's festival in German-speaking lands. They're known as Schützenfest, and they are celebrated particularly in Germany. They are well known from southern Germany as well as Switzerland. There's nothing similar in Anglo Saxon lore, and the reason might be the way towns were organized in German-speaking lands versus the relatively more centralized control of Anglo Saxon traditions. Today, the best known German Schützenfest is in Hanover, where about 5,000 marksmen compete, and it is also billed as the largest parade in the world. Today, women can also compete, but traditionally, of course, it would have been men. Switzerland boasts an even larger event. The Swiss Federal Shooting Festival began in 1824. It moves from region to region, and today it can boast about 50,000 participants. They have medieval roots in that towns, in order to defend themselves from marauders and from organized attacks, took it upon themselves to form militia that at first would have been armed with bows and arrows and later would have used crossbows. Over time, this morphed into a shooting festival. Some of these shooting festivals can look very militaristic and reflect their origins as an organized militia in that they have uniforms, salutes, and distinctive traditions. After World War II, a number of these distinctive traditions have been changed so that they reflect British and American traditions. For instance, several towns in Germany put their hands over their hearts in order to sing the national anthem. The reason is not hard to fathom because it's a very short jump between an organized local militia and what can be regarded as nationalism. Perhaps the best example of nationalism being expressed in shooting is the story of William Tell. The story has its roots in the 1470s, when he is regarded as the first Confederate or a prime mover in the Swiss Confederation. By the 1570s, his first name is recorded, Wilhelm, or William in English, and the story is briefly that the Austrian Habsburgs were interested in annexing German-speaking cantons. The result was a victory for the Austrians and the imposition of a governor in William Tell's region. In order to humiliate the populace and subjugate them further, he put his hat on top of a tree and demanded that every villager bow when walking by the hat. William Tell and his son did not. They were condemned to death, and the governor allowed them one escape. If the father shot an apple from the head of his son, with one go, he would be freed. Him and his son would be freed. Of course, he won this, but what he didn't win is part two of the story. Part two is that the governor asked, if you were supposed to make one shot, why did you take 2 crossbow bolts and not just one? After being reassured that he would not be put to death for his answer, he said that he was keeping the other bolt in case he killed his son. He would then use that to kill the governor. The governor was not amused, and after an interesting attempt to put him into prison, William Tell did indeed kill the governor, sparking a civil war and leading to Swiss independence. Or so the story goes. There is much doubt today if that story really took place, as was said. There are some interesting elements to this story. One is that William Tell used a crossbow to shoot the apple from his son's head. A crossbow would not have been used in Anglo Saxon lands, and the reasons are perhaps more to do to military expediency and less to accuracy. But before we go to Anglo Saxon lands, I would like to examine some of the targets used for the Schützenfest. This target dates to the 1670s and clearly shows a homage to hunting. Here we have a man in period costume with a brace of birds. This is not a real target, as can be seen from the staining on the paint, the very heavy brush strokes, and the fact that the substrate is particle board. Targets of this age are very, very rare, and of course this would be something nice to have as a tourist who probably wouldn't want to buy the original at an exorbitant amount of money. This example dates to 1933 and is on a relatively thin piece of wood. What's clear is that it is painted. Despite the amount of work devoted to this painting, it has been shot all the way through, and the individual shooters have signed where they have shot. It can be hung very easily here, and no doubt was hung after the event to commemorate the victor. The Schützenkönig would have kept this as a souvenir. Here is another example shot with a small bullseye right here. From any distance at all, this bullseye wouldn't have been visible, so it's clear that they were aiming for the heart of the animal. What's also interesting is this board is relatively thick, maybe an inch, and has another board glued on the back to keep it from warping. Again, this would have been used as a trophy long after the event. Here's an example dating to 1900. Again, a bullseye right here, very hard to see. And here is another interesting example, again on a heavy board, except this is accompanied by something with a similar design. One no doubt would have been regarded as a trophy, and the other was the original target. The question soon emerges, at this time when individual towns in German-speaking areas were having contests for guns and civilians would get together, have a party and shoot, why wasn't this taking place in Anglo-Saxon lands? Some of the reason might be that the Anglo-Saxons from an early age were more concerned with bows and arrows than with crossbows and later guns. It's also clear that in the Anglo-Saxon area they were more centrally controlled, and the story is rather simple to understand from an English perspective when you consider the 100 Years' War that lasted between 1337 and 1453. At this time, England used masses of bowmen using a 6-foot longbow arrayed against cavalry. The secret to their victory was rate of fire and less so accuracy. Much like a modern army, the issue was to get as many arrows into the air at any given time, with the hope that a few would reach their target. A crossbow is a very different weapon. It can be used by someone who is relatively untrained when compared to a bowman. However, only one bolt is capable of being fired at a time, and it requires using a winding device to stretch the very powerful bow to get another bolt into place. The result is, while each individual bolt might be more effective, the rate of fire is considerably less. In 1363, there's the first ordinance or parliamentary statute that says that individuals should not spend their Sundays and holidays playing games, but should be practicing archery. This would have taken place at a parish church, and not necessarily at the church, but in the green in front of the church. It is an interesting speculation. Would the archery take place after the church service, or would the archery take place instead of the church service? This is still debated. In 1477, Edward IV banned cricket because he was concerned that individuals are spending too much time with games rather than practicing archery. The result was another game, which is football or American soccer, was played instead of cricket. In 1503, Henry VII, in an effort to encourage his subjects to get better with bows, banned the use of crossbows to all but lords and well-to-do freeholders. Henry VIII also was a fanatic about archery. He is known to have participated in many tournaments, and his orders state that every township should have an area to practice archery, and that all young men should be taught archery, that it should be practiced on all holidays, and that every householder should have enough bows and arrows for both his family and his servants. Interestingly, he also gave insurance coverage to people practicing. They were not liable for injuring or killing someone who passed by the practice area. Elizabeth, his granddaughter, also sought to encourage archery by prescribing the maximum amount of money that could be charged for bows. The overall impression is that in Anglo Saxon lands, archery was linked to the military. It was not linked to forming a civilian militia. In contrast, on the continent, towns were relatively left to their own devices and had to form their own local militia to protect their own interests. The result is that these militia, at first archers, then became crossbowmen, and naturally transitioned into guns. This explains why the Schützenfest has many aspects of a local militia, including enormous beer binges once a year. So much so that there are warnings on social media to avoid certain towns when the Schützenfest are being held. Wherever Germans have settled, there are events like this, including in America and in Australia, and they follow the same ideas. It is interesting to see why certain cultural phenomena are only expressed within a linguistic community. It seems like a simple idea. However, the festival itself, is something very specific to the German-speaking world, and there are good historical reasons why. Thank you very much.